Welcome back to Communicology. Today I want to talk about something controversial when it comes to nonverbal communication, and that is physical appearance. So hang on for this. Before we start though, don't forget, please like, share, and subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. And don't forget to leave a comment below. So when it comes to physical appearance, why don't we talk about that when it comes to nonverbal communication? Well, again, if you cannot not communicate, if that's our standard, then everything about you communicates. So again, eye contact with oculesics, sure. Haptics with handshakes and fist bumps, sure. We think about gestures and everything with kinesics, sure. But also clothing, our body shape, everything about us communicates. And we know it. We don't like talking about it, but we deep down know it and we understand it. Again, we might not like it, but it's true. So it talks about how we feel about ourselves and how we feel about others. So let's dig into this a little bit more and talk about different aspects of it. So again, our bodies, naturally, non-verbally communicate, and then how we, of course, carry them and how we take care of our bodies do this as well, and impacts the way others view us and how we view ourselves. So when you look at the idea of self-esteem, how we feel about ourselves, a lot of that comes down to thoughts about our bodies and how our bodies look, how our bodies appear to ourselves and to others. And also, when you look at the concept of self-concept, that's how we think about ourselves. A lot of it comes down to, again, things about our bodies, not just like professions and stuff, but like literally like our bodies. Like I think of myself as a man, a 6 foot tall man, a white 6 foot tall man, with blonde, although graying hair and blue eyes. Those are things I know about myself. I have this concept, but like, how do I feel about myself? Do I feel strong? Do I feel thin? Do I feel confident the way I look? Those kind of things, self-esteem issues come into play. So those are things that are important to think about. Now, there are so many different categories of this, so I'll take some time going through each one of them as we discuss it. And again, these things are, so if you're not happy, don't shoot the messenger. I'm just the one who's telling you, and everyone knows this, which is why the industry that exists in the world for as far as our bodies are concerned, whether it's weightlifting, gym memberships, medications, things like Ozempic have exploded. The idea of taking some kind of medicine to help me with my body shape and all that kind of stuff. Clothing, hair care, skin care, makeup. Those industries are multi-billion dollar industries because we know it. So again, don't shoot the messenger. These are just the facts of what is. So the first thing, of course, is body shape. Now, I don't mean like fat, skinny. I mean like everyone's got like a body shape. Now, you could have like a triangle shape, broad shoulders, narrow waist. You could have something maybe a reverse, a normal triangle, like instead of inverted, you have a regular triangle where you have more of a narrower top and a larger waist. You could be hourglass shaped. You could be barrel shaped. Everyone's got different shapes. I mean, you just could be a pencil, whatever. It could be a tree, whatever your shape happens to be. Everyone has a shape, a basic body shape, and those things communicate different things to different people. And granted, a lot of it is subjective because everyone has their different types. Like you hear about like some women who are interested in guys who are super buff. And by buff, they mean like really like muscular and built, and they're more like that inverted, triangle type. And then you hear about ones who like the guys who are more like dad bod, who might be more towards the barrel shape, or something that's more like the ruggedly handsome type, who's got like broad shoulders but they're more like a tree, like they're fairly proportionate the whole way through. Again, these are all like different ways that people can look, but since you see us in culture, people have different tastes. They like people who look a little bit like this or a little bit like that. I mean, one of the most popular songs dealing with this is, like Sir Mix-a-Lot's Baby's Got Back. It's like that's literally a song about a certain body shape and a certain body part and the shape that goes along with it. And you go back to the Commodores singing about the brick house and even gave dimensions of the woman in the song. So you see these kind of things that they're part of where when we're looking at how we consider body shape. So everyone has a different shape. All of us at some point try to tinker with that shape. Maybe you want to be more of a certain shape and you work on your body to try to get it into that shape. So the joke, of course, is I'm trying to get into shape, but I don't have to worry about that because round is a shape. So it's one of those things. What shape do you want, and aim to try to get to it. And then typically January 1 rolls around, you start a new resolution to try to get in shape, and then by January 3 you're back to eating Doritos on the couch. But whatever. So everyone has a shape. So, and that's one thing comes into play. The other thing too is size. Now, this, of course, can come down to height and weight. It could also, when we think of it that way. So, again, height speaks things. What happens if you're 6 foot tall? What happens if you're 6.5 feet tall? What happens if you're 5.5 feet tall? And men and women both go through and feel the pressures of these things. It's possible for women to be too tall and it's socially awkward. It's possible for men to be too tall and it's socially awkward. Same thing with both of them being too short and being socially awkward, because we have basic understandings of what's the right height and what's the right height for men and women, and I'll even ask my students the kind of things like, if I want to get them really uncomfortable, I'll say, well, I'll ask the men, what makes a woman beautiful? And no one wants to answer that question. What body type, what height, whatever. And I'll ask the women, like, well, what makes a man beautiful? And they don't want to answer that question. Now, what they will agree on is that the man has to be taller than the woman. So as that's all they care about. So women, as long as the guy's taller, guys, as long as the woman's shorter. And again, what does it really matter? If you're one of those 5'7" kings out there and you're dating a 5'9" girlfriend, so be it. But it's just one of those things that we in our brains have this thing that the guy's supposed to be taller. It probably goes back to how we're wired, where men are supposed to be the protector. How can you be a protector if you're little? And that's the probably thing that we tell each other and tell our minds, that kind of thing. But the truth of the matter is that height does not indicate whether or not you could love somebody. That doesn't do that. Weight does not indicate whether or not you could love somebody, but we tend to think those kind of things. So obviously the height is something that you can't not change. You can't change how tall or how short you are. That's building your genetic code. And short of surgeries or being put on a rack, you're not going to change your height. Now, weight is one of those things that's always a very touchy thing, but let's go ahead and touch on it because it has to be said. And that's one of those things that we focus a lot on, weight and how it communicates. But weight is deceptive. Like when you look at things like a BMI, the body mass index score, and you look at your height and your weight and what's ideal, those things can be very terrible metrics, because you could have someone with a very high BMI and it just turns out because they're freaking muscularly huge. You have some guys like play in the NFL who are like 230 pounds of sheer muscle. They've got like 1% body fat, but their BMI is really high because they're 6'2" and 260 pounds or whatever, but it's all muscle. Whereas you take somebody who's 6'2" and 260 pounds, and they're just a regular dude, and they're fat, that kind of thing. Then it's like, well, they have the same BMI because it's the same weight, same height, and it's a weird metric. So if you look at like fat percentage, though, that's where it really does change things. But the thing is what's the ideal? I mean, I think of myself in fairly decent shape, but I've got a higher fat percentage than I really want. But I still fit very well into my clothing and things like that, and I'm comfortable with how I feel for the most part. So what's too much? Is it just a mental thing, or is there actually a physical thing? Well, we know from science that the more fat that you carry, the more that is in danger to your cardiovascular system, also to your pulmonary system. I mean, it's just very bad for you. It's bad for your bones. It's bad for your joints, all that kind of stuff like that. And the body positivity movement that existed very heavily for the past decade has kind of fizzled out with the invention of Ozempic, because all the people who are cheering on body positivity, healthy at any size, all of a sudden, as soon as Ozempic came around, well, two things happened. Ozempic came around, and a lot of them just jumped on it and started losing weight and saying, my goodness, I actually feel better. And the other thing, too, is a lot of the body positivity cheerleaders died. A lot of the people who are 400, 500, 600 pounds and cheering that kind of lifestyle on died off. A lot of those influencers have died and moved on. So it's one of those things that, we've come to realization, over time that really we do understand naturally that being healthy is important, and carrying around extra fat is not healthy, and it speaks to people. And again, I'm not saying you have to go out and get super jacked or anything like that, but you should be able to, walk a decent distance and breathe without labored, without any kind of labored work, and it's not too hard to understand that laying around all day and eating junk food is not a healthy thing. It shows disrespect for your body, and it shows disrespect for yourself. It shows disrespect to others, that you're not willing to take care of yourself. And it communicates that. You might not like that, but it's true. And the same thing can go with people who are obsessed with health too. You see some people who are like afraid to even eat a carrot stick because those calories might ruin their daily goals, and they want to stay at a 0% body fat. I mean, that's not healthy either. And you see men and women who are just bulged with every possible muscle rippling everywhere. It's like, that's not exactly healthy looking either. That's, everyone has to have at least something. So you'll hear about sometimes people who are like super healthy dying early too. And you're like, why? Well, because they weren't getting all the nutrients their body needed, because they were starving themselves to get into that shape. And then of course you get into those issues too, where you have like bulimia or things, or anorexia, where people are intentionally either starving themselves or throwing up or whatever, just to try to keep their calorie count low, and that's obviously not healthy either. But again, body shape, the size, the height, the weight, they communicate. You can control weight, you can't control height. That's true. I think too is it comes to skin color, that also communicates things, whether we like to admit it or not, but it does. And it depends on where you are, where you go around the world. You might be a rock star, you might be hated just because of your skin color. So it doesn't matter which skin color you have, but because everyone has some level of skin color. It's kind of funny, we talk about whites and blacks and everything in between, but there's really no true thing as white, even though I'm white. I'm actually Caucasian, but that's not white. I mean, a piece of paper is white. I mean, I'm not very white, but there's no black either, because black's an absence of color and absence of light, and no one's black. We're all just varying shades of tan and brown, and that's the truth of it. But the realistic aspect of communication is we do pay attention to those things, and we sometimes make judgment calls based on when we see skin color. So we see a certain skin color and we think certain things. And it communicates that. So that's unfortunate. And, people who try to avoid those things work hard not to. And it's a good place to be when you don't notice those things. I was fortunate enough that I was raised in a situation where I was basically raised on a university campus. So I saw people from all over the world. So I just grew up with that. I just didn't think anything of it. So I'm very blessed in that situation. But people who are born where there's only one color and you introduced someone who's not that color, things get awkward, and it doesn't matter which way you go on that lightness, darkness spectrum. It's the same thing. Wherever you have someone who's not used to it, they go in there and they're different. It's just that we just have this reaction to things that are different. That's part of what we wrestle with. Another thing to think about too is things like your hair color and hairstyle, hair length, all those kind of things come into play. Women spend an insane amount. I don't think that's my opinion. I think that's fact. An insane amount of money on hair. Why? Because they communicate to other women, not really to men. They communicate to other women their status, their everything by their hair. Guys don't spend an inordinate amount of time on their hair because it's to them, it's just something that covers their head. And guys don't do too much with that. Women spend tons and tons of money on hair, hundreds and hundreds of dollars a month on hair, just because they think it has to look a certain way. And it's mostly to impress other women who judge other women on their hair. Pro tip, ladies, guys don't care much about your hair. That's why they don't notice things like going out and getting a haircut, because they don't care. They care about you, not your hair. Women do their hair for other women. So, but we spend a lot of time doing that, and we color it or we cut it just right or style it just right. Why? Because we want to communicate a certain thing. I want to communicate power or youthfulness or some level of seduction or whatever that we're trying to communicate with our hair. And we choose colors because we want to be vibrant or fun or edgy or classy or whatever we're trying to show with hair color. And we spend all that time and effort doing that with our hair. And then, of course, we start thinking of other things like weird things like smell comes into play. Now, obviously, things like your body odor, that's part of it, sure. But also things like you look how much money is spent on deodorant, perfume, cologne, body spray. This is one thing where guys do spend stupid amounts of money on. Guys will spend just dumb. You'll smell it, go to a college campus or a high school, and you'll just be overwhelmed with the dudes who are hosing themselves down with body spray because they think that that's going to make women go crazy for them because they smell like some certain whatever smell that's in their thing. So that they just do that kind of thing. Women do it with perfume as well, and again, a lot of times they're trying to portray something through smell, and that's part of the aspect of it. Other thing too, it comes into play, artifacts, and by artifacts, this is one of those things that you don't think too much of until you start thinking about it and go, yeah, but jewelry, why do you spend money on jewelry? What's the point of jewelry? Other than like a wedding band, that shows that you're married, what's the point of jewelry otherwise? It's an artifact. It's an accessory to show that you like to adorn yourself with other glittery things. If you think about logically, there's no logic for jewelry. It's purely an emotional appeal. I want to show off something. I want to highlight my ears with ear piercings. I want to highlight my neck with a necklace or show something, like you might have a cross necklace or something. Then you're going to try to show people that you care about Jesus because you wore a cross necklace or something, or whatever you're trying to identify as, and you have some kind of jewelry. Other than that, too, you have other things too, like guys who wear ties. What that's an artifact. Why would you wear a tie? What does it have to do with anything? It's just, and then you look at all the different styles and shapes of ties. Why would you pick that? And you can spend a lot of time and money on a tie, but it's one of those things. Why do you have one? What are you showing off with that? And then, of course, you think of other things that you don't think about normally, but these things. Glasses are artifacts. I need it to see, but at the end of the day, you go into an optometrist and they've got just hundreds of different kinds of glasses, and you'll sit there and you'll look and look and look and look and try on different ones and say, these ones complement my face or my head or whatever. What do you mean complement your head? I thought the whole purpose was vision. Well, yeah, but I want to look good. Well, I see. There we go. Now we're talking about it. Now we get to the truth of the matter is, I just got these things online and they were like $17 because frankly, I was thinking one, I think they look okay. But the other thing too is I want them to be able to block air. Like when I'm cycling, I want to be able to I want the wind to go around it, not come through and tickle my eyeballs. And also being $17, if I lose them or step on them or drive over them with my car, I won't cry too deeply, kind of a thing like that. So, but at the end of the day, I could go out and spend $300 on glasses, $500 on glasses. It's not uncommon, especially if you have like bifocals or trifocals and all that stuff. The price really adds up. But again, we think a lot about not just like, are these helping my vision, but it's like, do they look good? So do I look sharp? Do I look intelligent? Do I look sexy? Do I look daring? All this kind of things just by glasses. And we think of that. And then, of course, one thing I've talked about before, and that's clothing. Clothing really communicates a lot. What do I want to communicate? Do I want to communicate, again, something that's edgy, something that's sexy, something that's revealing, something that's conservative, something that's unorthodox, something that's punk, something that's whatever? Our clothing really communicates a ton. And the things that we choose to wear in certain moments. And we can communicate respect, we can communicate disrespect, we can communicate all kinds of things by the clothing choices that we pick. So when you think about the idea of what you're wearing at any given time, like why am I wearing this shirt? Well, it's comfortable. It looks okay. It looks good on camera. But those are things I have to think about too, because I have some clothes that I wouldn't necessarily want to broadcast in because it just doesn't quite look right. Doesn't fit the part, or it might look poorly. Like there's some shirts I've worn in the past. I've looked at the video and I'm like, wow, that shirt doesn't quite go well with all these books behind you. There's kind of a weird clash. So mental note, maybe don't wear that shirt again. But again, it's one of those things that, like, that's a weird thing to think about, but it communicates. I mean, our clothing communicates all the time. So when you go out to Walmart and someone's out there in their pajamas and you're like, hey, gads, have some respect for yourself, have some respect for other people. That's one of those things that we don't think too deeply of until then we see it. Then we're like, oh yes, clothing. And you think about how many billions of dollars a year is spent in clothing. That you just, because I want to communicate something with my clothing. So I'll go out and buy a jersey of my favorite athlete or whatever, because I want to communicate that I care about this team or about this athlete or whatever. Or I'm going to wear this suit to show that I respect my boss when I go in for a job interview or something like that, or whatever you're trying to communicate. It's amazing how much clothing does that. That's why we spend so much time and effort focusing on clothing, picking out the right clothing for the right moment, and focusing on those kind of things, because that's what's communicating. So when we look at physical appearance, again, it's more than just my body. It's how I adorn it, how I decorate it, and go from there. And we didn't even talk about things like tattoos. That's another aspect of things, of ways that you communicate things. And why did you get a tattoo? What's the purpose behind the tattoo? Where did you get the tattoo? Where is it stuck on your body? And what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. But you can just see, you can run amok talking about this kind of aspect of nonverbal communication. It's hugely important because, your appearance is what you have. It's you. When you're out in public or when you're online in front of people in video and things like that, or pictures, and we spend so much time with pictures these days, especially when you look at things like Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube that are video focused, picture focused, it's the king, so if we're going to read a book and judge it by its cover, what's the cover look like? And so we're looking and we see that what this book appears to be before we even grab the book off the shelf and look at it. So body appearance matters. You know this. Now you have a good understanding and thinking, thought process of the entire aspect of all of it. So that's what I have for you today. Thank you very much for tuning in. As always, please like, share, and subscribe. I greatly appreciate that. And if you didn't like what you heard today, that's okay. Thanks for tuning in anyway. But I'll see you next time on Communicology.